So we're here on Daf Kuf Yud Zayin Omid Beis, and let's just review the Mishnah. Mazgulo Kos Shlishim Baruch Al Mizonim. So the third of the four kosos, the third is Birkas HaMazon. And Revi, the fourth kos, which is the last of the four kos, Gomer Lov is a Hallel. We recite Hallel on the fourth kos. V'yomer Lov Birkas Hashir, which we don't know exactly what Birkas Hashir means, and we'll have to wait patiently to get to the Gemara. Bein HaKosos HaLolu, between the third and the fourth kosos, Im Rotza Lishtos Yishte, but Bein Shlisha Vi Lo Yishte. He says the following: between the third and the fourth kosos, we're not allowed to drink wine, an extra kos. But between the other kosos, let's say between the first and the second, we could add a kos, and we could even drink after the fourth kos. But between the third and the fourth, we're not allowed to drink. And the Rashbam explains that when you drink wine before a meal, it doesn't get you intoxicated. But when you drink wine after the meal, then it could intoxicate you. It's you've already ended the meal, and if you drink the wine then, so what's going to happen is if your mind is not lucid, it's not clear because of the extra wine you drank, then you might not be able to recite Hallel properly. But once you finish the Hallel and you drank the fourth kos, then we don't care if you get intoxicated. You've already fulfilled your mitzvah. And between the first and the second kossos, you're allowed to drink, says the Rashbam, because before the meal, you don't get intoxicated. Now, there's wine that you drink before the meal or during the meal does not have that powerful impact to intoxicate you. On the contrary, wine before the meal stimulates your appetite. But wine between the third and the fourth kosos, since it's after the meal, that could really intoxicate you, and you have not yet recited Hallel. Once you finish Hallel with the fourth kos, then you're okay, you can drink more wine. Amalei Rav Chanan l'Rav Shmamino Birkas HaMazon Tuna Kos. We see that the third kos was established on Birkas HaMazon. And from that, we could extrapolate that in general, during the entire course of the year, when I bench, I should be drinking wine and accompanying the Birkas HaMazon with a kos shel yayin. And that basically is an application of the general concept called yayin kos shel bracha, meaning yayin in a kos shel bracha, meaning yayin that accompanies a bracha. Not every bracha is accompanied by yayin, but if the bracha has a certain element of uniqueness to it, it's, we get together for Birkas HaMazon and we're thanking Hashem, or for Kiddush or Avdollah. In these cases where the yayin is a special kiyum and the bracha is part of a Shevach Vodoya, then we enhance that Shevach Vodoya by drinking a cup of wine. Amaleh. Arba kosei tiknu Rabbana derech cherus. So Rava responds to Rav Chanan, and he says the following: you know what? You cannot extrapolate from our Mishnah that Birkas HaMazon, in general, the whole year round, requires a kos. It's only the Birkas HaMazon of the night of the Seder that requires a kos. And why is that? Because Arba kosei tiknu Rabbanan, the Rabbanan established that we drink 4 kosos, and each kos is connected to a different bracha, and this is called derech cherus. When we drink the kos, we experience or we demonstrate the fact that we were liberated from slavery. So that's a new dimension to yayin, which is unique to the Leil HaSeder. And we have 4 brachos on the night of the Seder. Kol chad v'chad navid be-mitzvah. Each kos requires its own mitzvah, meaning you're going to recite 4 brachos. Let's just go over quickly the 4 brachos. Number 1 is Birchas Kiddush. Number 2 is Birchas Gal Yisrael at the end of Magid. Number 3 is Birchas HaMazon. Number 4 is Hallel. And each one of these brachos is going to be attached to a kos of yayin, and by drinking that wine, we demonstrate cherus. But that doesn't prove anything about the rest of the year, because in a normal meal, I'm not obligated to demonstrate that I'm a slave that was liberated and freed from slavery, and therefore could be that a regular Birkas Hamazon would not require a kos.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I know it's later on in the Mishnah, but that he says that you can drink between the second and the third, or the first and second even. The drink between the third and the fourth, we wouldn't even be allowed to, because we already made, we're making another bracha now. In other words, can you drink, when you're drinking the next cup, can you drink, the cost is Birkat Hamazon, and did we make a bracha for now on it? I don't remember.
Well,
on the third cup, after the Birkat Hamazon, we don't
no.
So then we would technically be allowed to drink more wine.
After the third cup?
After the third cup.
Right. It's not for the intoxication.
Skip the intoxication.
Right.
I'm saying is, I don't understand why I talk about the intoxication, but are we technically allowed to drink it after we made the Birkat Hamazon, and we did make a bracha achronah, can we still drink wine? And if so, why do we have to make another bracha for the Hallel? Because each cup we're making a bracha on. So if we would drink between the third and the fourth cup, it would mean that we have to make another bracha, and then we'd end up with more brachot for the wine.
So you're asking the following question. We have a principle in halacha that we don't want to be marbe brachos, meaning we recite the brachos that we're required to, but we don't want to add extra brachos that are unnecessary. That's called a bracha sheina tzricha. So, but let's say, for example, I finish benching on a regular day the whole year round, and mitchashekli, I get in the mood to drink wine. So I make a bar priya gafa and I drink the wine. So if after the third course I benched, and now, you know what? I'm in the mood for another cup of wine.
Which we do on Pesach.
No, I'm saying right now, before I recite Hallel. So in other words, I finish Birkas Hamazon, and before I begin Hallel, I decide, you know what? I'm thirsty for another cup of wine. Technically, you should be allowed to drink another cup of wine. You'd have to make a bar priya gafa.
If the wine were out on the table, if we knew we were going to drink more, but yeah.
Right. So he would recite a bar priya gafa, and then he would drink the wine. The reason why we're not going to allow him to do so is because of the intoxication.
But not because of another bracha.
Okay, now we're up to Kos Revi. We're up to the fourth Kos, which is the Kos of Hallel. So the Gemara quotes the Mishnah, Revi Gomer Olav Hallel, the Omer Olav Birchas Hashir. And now we're going to turn to Daf Kuf Yud Ches. My Birchas Hashir. The Mishnah doesn't tell me what is this extra bracha that we have to tag on to Hallel. It's called Birchas Hashir, but what does that mean? And perhaps you and I would have said that Birchas Hashir is another way of referring to Hallel. But we already mentioned Hallel, and now you're saying in addition to Hallel is Birchas Hashir. So Rabbi Yehuda Omer, here we have machlokes between two Amoraim, the first of which is Rabbi Yehuda, and he says, Yalucha Hashem Elokeinu. We have a paragraph that we're going to add after the Hallel. So it would seem that according to Rabbi Yehuda, during the entire course of the year, we do not add a special paragraph which ends with a bracha after the Hallel. We finish the Hallel, and that's it. But on this night, we're going to add a paragraph which is called the Alucha after the Hallel, and it's going to end with a Chasima Baruch Ato Hashem Melech Mulol Batishbachos. And this is called Birchas Hashir, which is another way of saying Birchas Hashevach. It's an additional praise to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the form and the structure of a bracha that we add after Hallel. And the question is, what do we do the rest of the year? If the rest of the year we also add this ending, this chasima to Hallel, then why would I need, according to Rabbi Yehuda, the Mishnah to tell me that we do so on the night of Pesach? And if you take a look for a moment here at Tosas Dimar Maskal Mai, the top Tosas on the page, he says the following. He doesn't even ask our question, but he sort of addresses the question and answers it. He says, "Kamashmal dafilu b'makom shelo nagu levarich achra b'leil Pesach, sarich levarich." It means that whether or not we add that paragraph during the entire course of the year, whenever we say Hallel on Hanukkah, on Rosh Chodesh, and so forth and so on, do we add the last paragraph? That depends upon minhag. There were some that had the custom of adding that paragraph, but there were others who did not add that paragraph. And Rabbi Yehuda wants to tell you that even if you belong to that school, that custom, that we do not add a paragraph, but nevertheless, on the night of Pesach, because of the nature of shir, meaning of shevach of odoya, which is a special center chiyuv, high-profile chiyuv on this night, everybody will agree that we add this bracha, this paragraph that starts with Yalucha and ends Baruch Atah Hashem Melech Mulo Batishbachos. So that's the chiddush of our Mishnah, that even in a place where they're not knowing to make this last bracha at the end of Hallel, the whole year round, nevertheless on Pesach everyone will agree universally that we make that bracha. Now Tosfos gives a second answer. Inami, 3 lines down from the top. Even in a place like our minhag, as we're familiar with it, that the whole year round on how we end with the bracha of Yalucha Hashem Elokeinu, nevertheless, Havamina would have thought dafka be Yomin, al b'layla ein sarch levarach. Tosfos says that there's a Havamina to differentiate between 2 kinds of Hallel. There's Hallel that's recited during the day, and a Hallel that's recited at night. We don't understand the difference between the 2, but Tosfos says the difference between the 2 is whether or not we add this bracha of Baruch Atah Hashem Melech Mulo Batishbachos. And Tosfos seems to be implying that the real Makoi Hallel is only during the day. The Hallel that we recite on the night of the Seder is a secondary kind of Hallel. It doesn't really hit the mark because it's at night. And if it's a different, shall we call it a downgraded kind of Hallel, and it doesn't have the full-fledged status of Hallel because it's during the night, then we do not add a chasima at the end of the Hallel. All this is in the Havamina before Rabbi Yehuda in his interpreting of the Mishnah. Now, what difference does it make whether the Hallel is during the day or Hallel at night? And why should the last bracha be dependent upon Hallel during the day or Hallel at night? And Tosfos doesn't give us much of a clue. Now keep in mind that the Mishnah at the end of Masechet Megillah on Daf Chav Gimel lists the mitzvos that can be fulfilled during the day and only during the day. And then it has a list, enumerated list of those mitzvahs that can be fulfilled by night and only by night. Hallel appears on the first list of the mitzvahs that are fulfilled by day. And the Gemara derives that from various sources in the Torah that Hallel is during the day. So why do we recite Hallel at night in the case of Leil HaSeder? And to my best of my knowledge, that's the only night of the year that we recite Hallel. And that has to do with a pasuk in Yeshayahu. He says, "Belel is Kaddish Chag," that on the night of Pesach, where we have the special mitzvah of Korban Pesach, and of course the unique mitzvah of Matzah, Maror, these unique mitzvahs add up to a chiyuv Hallel. The Hallel is not the regular Hallel that's generated by the Moed, because when the Hallel is generated by the Moed, when do we recite the Hallel? Only during the day. So every Moed can be divided up into 2 parts, the night and the day. And Hallel belongs to the Moed by day and not to the Moed at night. However, in the case of Pesach, the 15th of Nisan, because of the special mitzvos of the night of Pesach, that night generates an entirely different category of Hallel, not the Hallel of Moed. Because again, let's reiterate, the Hallel of Moed is limited to what? To the day. Okay, Joe is here, so he could say it out loud.
Right.
But with regard to Pesach, there's a new entity which is called Hal by night. I'll prove to you that the Hal of Pesach is unique and different. Where do we find a case where we divide Hal into two parts? On the night of the Seder, we recite the first two paragraphs of Hallel before the Suda. And yet, the balance of Hallel is only to be recited after the Suda, after Birkas HaMazon. Obviously, this Hallel has a different mechanism with its own laws.
Make the bracha after the dolphin, in the middle of Hallel.
Well, I'm not sure which bracha you're referring to.
Yes.
Oh, you mean, yeah, that is true. I mean, there are a lot of brachas that we're going to recite after the first two paragraphs of Hallel. Many brachas. But the point is that we divide up Hallel into two parts. And this is very fascinating. The entire entity of Hallel on Leil HaPesach is radically different. And the Hallel the rest of the year is what we call a mitzvah of Kriya, reading. The nature of the mitzvah and the obligation is recitation. The mitzvah of Hallel on the night of the Seder is radically different. It's a mitzvah of shira, of song. It's not the recitation, but rather the shira. And that shira is generated by geula. However, there are two geulas. There's geula of Mitzrayim, which we all experienced, and that night of Pesach is Chayav Adam Liros Atzmo. So he's experiencing the geula of Mitzrayim. That's a geula on the past. And then there's a second part of Hallel, which is going to be recited on the future, after the introduction of Shvo Chamos Chal HaGoyim, when we talk about the ultimate geula at the time that God will destroy our enemies and will bring about the ultimate redemption. So that now we have two parts of the Shira. The Shira al Avar, which is a song of praise for the past. Mitzrayim Galtanu, we speak about God taking us out of Mitzrayim, and we are included in that experience of Yetzias Mitzrayim, and that's our obligation on this night, to see ourselves as if we ourselves were freed from slavery. But then we have a different Shira, and that's the Shira at the end of the Seder. The entire end of the Seder is focused on the ultimate Geula. The praise to Hashem and the songs that we sing to extol God are divided into two different categories. We praise God for Geula, but in the first case, for the Geula that we experienced in the past. And in the second case, to extol God as if he had already brought about the ultimate Geula. We know from Tanakh that God has given us his divine promise that he will bring about the ultimate redemption and he will destroy our enemies. This is what we're praying for 3 times a day. And on this night of the Seder, we are so close to the realization of that promise. It's almost as if the reality of Geula is in front of our eyes. We can touch it, we can feel it, and therefore we recite praise and shira. But now we have a very strange problem. And that is, how do you, I'm going to use a metaphoric phrase here, how do you sew together the two parts of Hallel? After all, the Machayev is the phrase, the shira, the song for the Geula, whether it's the past Geula or the future Geula. How do you tie it all together? How do you make it into one entity? And as Joe points out very well, there are a lot of things that go on between the first half of Hallel and the second half of Hallel. You know, we're going to eat the matzah, we're going to eat the maror, we're going to do charosas, we're going to do a lot of different things. And there seems to be a loose wire over here and a disconnect between the first half of Hallel and the other half of Hallel. And Rav Yehuda's Machadesh, an incredible chiddush. He says that the chasima, the closure of Hallel, is going to relate back to the entire Hallel from the start. So that during the rest of the year, according to that minhag that requires this bracha at the end of Hallel, we need to tie together all the different mizmorim, all the different psalms that we recited in Hallel, and apparently they're still, even though we don't make a hefsek in between, they're still disjointed. And the clincher, which closes Hallel and ties together the beginning of Hallel with the end to make it into one continuous entity, is the bracha at the end of Hallel, in which we recite Baruch Atah Hashem, Mahalel, Melech Mulol Batishbachos. Melech Mulol Batishbachos. God, you are exceedingly praised, and all the praises that we've given you, all the tishbachos are one, are now linked together to join. The other minhag says, no, we don't need to link together the various parts of Hallel. They link together automatically because we had no hefsek. We continuously read one chapter of Tehillim after another. We don't need a chasima to gather up the troops and make them into one pluga, one entity. It is one entity by virtue of the fact that we weren't mafs. But the other minhag says, no. Every mizmar, every kapitel Tehillim has its own theme. And as such, the different themes are very loosely connected and hanging together. For example, if you take a look at Hallel, you'll see that a number of the paragraphs of Hallel are really petitions. They're not even songs of praise. Ahavti Hashem ki yishmas koli tachnunai b'yozeli. I'm crying out to Hashem, Ona Hashem Oshiana. Whereas B'tzeis Yisrael Mitzrayim, that's already pure praise. So that if each and every one of the parts and the segments of Hallel have a different theme, some of which are Shira and Tishbachos, other are Tefillah and Bakasha, then we need something to glue it together, and that's the minhag to complete the Hallel with a brach at the end, Melech Mulol Batishbachos. Comes along Rabbi Yehuda, and he says that although there are those who maintain, and that was one strong minhag, that we don't need to tie together Hallel. Hallel is a continuous flow, not so on the night of Pesach. On the night of Pesach, we have Hefsekos, and fundamentally the two parts of Hallel are different entities. There's Shira La'avar and Shira La'hava. There's the Gula Shel La'avar and there's a Gula Asida. Each one generates its own Hallel. And now, says Rav Yehuda, we need desperately to connect the Hallel from the beginning to the end. But how do we do that? And the answer is the Melech Mulol Batishbachos has the power inherent in it to go back to the original Mahulol Batishbachos, to the very first one in the first paragraph that with which we opened up the Hallel, and then stitch it all together into one entity. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Nishmas Kolcha. That's not what Birchas Hashir is all about. I'm not sure, says Rabbi Yochanan, that we need a binder to connect the beginning of Hallel with the end of Hallel. There are two separate entities of Hallel. One is generated by the chiyuv of Shevach for the Gula of Mitzrayim, and the other is because we see in front of our eyes the fulfillment of the ultimate redemption. Those are two parts of Hallel. No need to connect them together. So then the question is, what's Birchas Hashir? What did the Mishnah mean when it says that in addition to Hallel, you have to add another bracha, which is called Birchas Hashir? What is the nature of Birchas Hashir? Comes along Rabbi Yochanan, and he says, Nishmas Kol Chai. Now, wait a second. Until now, we've been saying what we call Kapitlach of Tehillim. These are not phrases or formulations that were created or authored by Chazal, excuse me, by the Anshe Knesset Gdola, but Nishmas Kol Chai. What's Nishmas Kol Chai? It's a very beautiful liturgical poem it's a piyut, but it's not part of Hallel. Says Rabbi Yochanan, you're right, it's not part of Hallel. It's a separate entity. And it's called Birchas Hashir. Now, where do we have an encounter with Nishmas Kol Chai? Everybody, at the end of, help me out here, please, at the end of,
And the Pesachim.
excellent. On Shabbos and Yontif, we conclude our Pesukei de Zimra with Nishmas Kol Chai, with what Rabbi Yochanan dubs as Birchas Hashir. Yes. But what I'm saying is that we finish all the paragraphs of Tehillim. You know, Pesukei de Zimra is very, very similar conceptually to Hallel. I mean, just like Hallel is a choice of certain Mizmorim in Tehillim, so too Pesukei de Zimra, again, a different choice, but nevertheless, it's also fundamentally paragraphs of Shira that are taken from David HaMelech's Tehillim. And all of a sudden, we finish with Kol HaNeshama Ta'alka, and then we go off on a tangent, we don't know why, with Shiras Hayam. And then finally, at the conclusion of this Shira, we have this beautiful poem called by Rabbi Yochanan Birchas Hashir, which is Nishmas Kol Chai. And Rabbi Yochanan seems to be jumping on the bandwagon. What do I mean? He finds the precedent to conclude Pesukei de Zimra, which are Kapitluch and Tillim, and that Shevach Odoya ends with this liturgical piyut, if I could call it, called Nishmas Kol Chai. Let's do the same thing in a corresponding parallel way with regard to Hallel, because Hallel likewise is a combination and a recitation succeeding a successful recitation of various Kapitluch of Tillim as Shevach Odoya. Let's inject Nishmas Kol Chai. And that's going to be the siyum of, first in the case of Shabbos and Yontif, Pesukei de Zimra, and in the case of Hallel, it's going to be the siyum of Hallel. The problem that I have is that Rashbam is not happy with my interpretation. Take a look at the Rashbam, Dibra Maskil Rabbi Yochanan Omar. It's about 4 lines down in the Rashbam. You have it? Yeah. Rabbi Yochanan Nishmas Kol Chai Af Nishmas. Do you hear the word Af? In other words, Rabbi Yochanan is not disagreeing with Rabbi Yehuda who came before him. We need to recite Melech Mu'ula Batishbachos at the end of Hallel. But Rabbi Yochanan says that that's not what we refer to, what the Mishnah is talking about with regard to Birchas Hashir, because that's part of Hallel. And the Mishnah says that in addition to Hallel, we recite Birchas Hashir. Dahainu Birchas Hashir D'Bas Nisan, to Ili Alucha, that last paragraph which Rabbi Yehuda wanted to add at the end of Hallel. We recite Yalucha on every day. The Rashbam is not sensitive to the various minhagim that Tosfos mentions. He's assuming that we, ungenumen, as we say in Yiddish, we've accepted that minhag, that we finish Hallel with Yalucha. So that's called Hallel. Don't call that Birchas Hashir. Therefore, Birchas Hashir has to add something to Hallel that's not part of Hallel. And where do we find this Nishmas Kol Chai as an addition that's not really part and parcel of the entity of Pesukei de Zimra? Because Nishmas Kol Chai is not a chapter in Tehillim. Oh, now we have a precedent that we can add to chapters of Tehillim this Nishmas Kol Chai. It has a very important role. Who can help me out over here? What is the role and the purpose of Nishmas Kol Chai? Jeff, can you speak a little louder because...
Shevach?
But what is unique about the Shevach of Nishmas Kol Chai that comes at the end, the tail end of all the Shevach? We've already recited chapter after chapter after chapter of Shevach. But why do we need the Nishmas Kol Chai? I believe the answer is
It's like
that
Hallel.
man.
Is it like Hallel? Like, it's a different kind of praise for HaKadosh Baruch Hu that we don't.
I
do
wouldn't say it's
all
a
the-
different kind of
but-
praise,
but
but
it-
it's a statement about all the praise that we made.
put
What
it
are we?
together?
What are we declaring in Nishmas Kol Chai about all the praise that we've been reciting chapter after chapter? Well, let me ask you a question. Have we done an adequate job? Does man who's here today and gone tomorrow, who's flesh and blood, born of Rechem Imo, does man have the capacity to praise the Almighty, who is infinite? We made an effort. We certainly put our front foot forward. We recited one chapter after the other. But tachlis, as we say, at the end of the day, is somebody going to claim that human beings, as great as we are, and as great as David HaMelech was, the author of Tehillim, that we successfully thanked Hashem and praised Him?
Does it have anything to do with it coming from the neshama?
Oh, I don't know about the neshama.
No, but we're talking about nishma. Nishma Kol Chai is the neshama.
All right, so maybe you're taking me on a different direction. I just want to finish this direction and we'll go in your direction. What I'm saying is that Nishmas Kol Chai is a consent, is a how do you say concede is a conceding, I don't know, whatever the word is, that we have to admit we didn't do an adequate job. We can't do an adequate job. That's what Nishmas Kol Chai is all about. And even if we were as great as all the mountains and the great as all the seas and so forth and so on, Ein Anu Maspikim Lahodos Lahal L'Shabeh, we can't do the job. And unless man is willing to concede, to admit that he can't do an adequate job, then everything that he did until that point is really like gaiva. Gaiva meaning it's like audacity on the part of man to claim little man who's not even a flea on the back of an elephant is going to praise the Almighty God who's infinite. So we need sort of like a disclaimer almost like an apology. And we say to the Ribono Shel Olam, I apologize to you because maybe, in a sense, I crossed over my bounds and I affronted you with a capital Y, by daring with a tremendous amount of audacity and chutzpah to declare your praises. Like, for example, one of the things that David HaMelech says, we say it every day in Pesukei Zimro, is Lisvunaso ein mispar. Do you remember those words? What does it mean, ein mispar? You know, something could be a large number. You could talk about 1 million and 1 billion and 1 trillion, but it's still countable. But ein mispar means that there's no concept of mispar with regard to the Ribono Shel Olam. You can't say, well, you know, we can reach this number, but God is that number. No, there's no number. The concept of number is irrelevant to God. So at the end of the day, after all our praises, we have to make a concession. And we have to admit that this is, you know, this is a really very tricky kind of enterprise that we got involved in trying to praise the Lord. Who are we to praise the Lord? And that's what Nishmas is all about. Says Rabbi Yochanan, to the same extent that on every Shabbos and Yom Tov, after all the extended Pesukei Zimra, we know that on Shabbos and Yom Tov, we have an extended Pesukei Zimra. We had many, many paragraphs from Tehillim, but at the end of the day, we need Nishmas. Nishmas almost redeems the entire enterprise of Sheva. Because without redeeming it, it's a chutzpah, as we said before, to praise the Almighty. How do we redeem it? A disclaimer. We say, you know what? I have to admit, Ein Anu Maspikim. We can never do the job. And Rabbi Yochanan is going to borrow that concept and apply it here to the night of the Seder. Because on this night of the Seder, we have many, many different expressions of Shevach Odoya. We have what we call Ribui Shevach Odoya. Take, for example, Dayenu. Or, for example, all the paragraphs in which we thank Hashem for taking us out of Mitzrayim, for destroying our enemies, for all the makos, and for bringing us into the land. All this is extended Shevach. And with an extended Shevach, we're going to take our cue from Shabbos and Yontiv, and we need that statement in which we concede Einonu Maspikim, and that's Nishmas. Umayshno Lel Pesach Denokai. Why would the Mishnah mention Birchas Hashir as an addition on the night of Pesach when we recite Birchas Hashir, meaning Rav Yehuda's definition of Rav Yehuda, namely Melech V'lo Batishbachos, on every single night that we recite Hillel, every single day that we recite. Im Lola Hosif Od Bracha Cheres, we have to add a new bracha, and that's the bracha of Nishmas Kol Chai. So you'll see in footnote number Dalid a summary of this Rashbam. Shesover Rabbi Yochanan she'ein lomer sheholech al birchas yalucha, that when it says birchas hashir, it's referring to yalucha. Sharei osanu om b'chol pa. The whole year round we recite yalucha. That's how we conclude Hallel the whole year round. Ubehechech shekshaomer atana gomer olav asahal v'achach v'omer olav birchas hashir bolahosik. It's an addition to that which we recite the whole year round. And what is that addition? Hainu nishmas. And the Rashbam adds, okay, we didn't read the last few words in the Rashbam. He says that V'hainu diyomer alocha ki Rabbi Yochanan v'travaya. What does it mean v'travaya? Travaya means that we'll require birchas yalucha, melech mula v'tishbachos, but in addition, we'll require nishmas. Mishuv sheposkim ki Rabbi Yochanan lomer shneim. We accept Rabbi Yochanan, we recite both. Now here, Abosai, I want to raise a question, and I don't know the answer, but maybe we'll work it out together. Where do we fit in Birchas Hashir according to Rabbi Yochanan? I mean, there's no question according to Rav Yehuda that Birchas Hashir is the last paragraph of Hallel, and we don't add anything beyond the regular Hallel. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, that we're adding a whole new entity, which is called Birchas Hashir, otherwise known as Nishmas Kol Chai. Where should we insert that? Should it be part of Hallel? Or no, it's a separate entity after Hallel. According to everything we've been saying until this point, it should be part of Hallel. And therefore, Nishmas should come before the paragraph Yalucha, which concludes Hallel with Melech Mula B'Tishbachos. The only problem is that Rabbi Yochanan wanted to make a big deal about finishing Hallel and then adding Birchas Hashir. Because if you recall, the entire thrust of Rabbi Yochanan's logic is based on the fact that the Mishnah adds something in addition to Hallel, which Rabbi Yochanan identifies as Nishmas Kol Chai, or the Mishnah calls it in its language Birchas Hashir. And that would lead me to the conclusion that Nishmas Kol Chai should be recited after Baruch Atah Hashem Melech Mula B'Tishbachos. I've completed Hallel, stop. And now I add a new entity which is called Birchas Hashir. Do we have a Haggadah here? Joe, if you can, if I can, I'm sorry, I'm being mature. Or gentlemen, any of,
I have to turn so many pages.
okay, good. So you take a look in there if you don't mind. We'll see what we can find here. Oh, So in my Haggadah, Nishmas Kol Chai comes after the paragraph Yalalucha, but before the Chasima, which is Melech Gadol B'Tishbachos.
Here comes after Hodu.
After Hodu, but you haven't yet said Melech Mulo B'Tishbachos yet, right? That's going to come later, at the end of Yishtaba, all right? So this is really strange. When you think about it, the way it appears in this Haggadah, and also Joe has it in his Haggadah, I'm wondering if you gentlemen have another Haggadah, because I think there are others who have it a little differently. But according to this, where is Birchas Hashir? On the one hand, it seems to be after the Hallel, because we've already recited Hallel. But on the other hand, it's before the Chasima of Melech Mulol Batishbachos. After Yishtaba. I mean to say that Nishmas is before Yishtaba. Is that correct? And I think this reflects this ambiguity almost, this kind of dual role of Nishmas. On the one hand, Nishmas has to be the closure of Hallel, and therefore it should be in Hallel. But on the other hand, it's a separate bracha, Birchas Hashir, and it's outside of Hallel, therefore it should come after Hallel. So we made a sort of a compromise, and we inject Nishmas in between the end of Hallel, but before the Chasimas HaBracha, Baruch Atah Hashem, Melech Mulo Batishbachos. And it seems to me, in my limited understanding, that maybe what Rabbi Yochanan wants to accomplish is to maintain the structure and the nusach as we have it already before we get to Leil HaSeder. In other words, we don't want to deviate from the structure as it is. On every Shabbos, on every Yontif, we complete Hallel with Melech Mulo Batishbachos, and not only that, we complete Nishmas with Melech Mulo Batishbachos, which means the following, that after we complete the Psukei Zimra, we recite Nishmas, and then Yishtabach, which ends with Melech Mulo Batishbachos. So on the one hand, on every Shabbos and Yontif, we insert Nishmas Kol Chai at the end of Psukei Zimra, after we completed Psukei Zimra. But on the other hand, we want to make it part of the entire entity of Psukei Zimra, which ends with Melech Mulo Batishbachos, with Yishtabach. So Yishtabach is going to be the closure of Psukei Zimra, right? What's the opening of Psukei Zimra? Baruch Shamar. Oh, Hodu. Okay, you're in Nusach Sfar. I'm talking about Nusach Ashkenaz. It could be that even according to Nusach Sfar, Hodu is just an introduction. But basically, we begin Psukei Zimra. The kickoff is Baruch Shamar, and then the closure of Psukei Zimra is Melech Mulo Batishbachos at the end of Yishtabach. So what do we do with Nishmas Kol Chai on every Shabbos and every Yontif? We wait till we finish the Hallel. After we finish the Hallel with the recitation of all the different paragraphs and Mizmorim of Tehillim, then we recite Birchas Hashir, meaning Nishmas Kol Chai, but we want to have Nishmas Kol Chai as an addendum, which is really part of Hallel. In the case of Psukei Zimra, it's part of Psukei Zimra. And how can we take something that's a liturgical formulation of a beautiful prayer that's not part of Hallel and make it into part of Hallel? What we're going to do is we're going to wait with Yishtabach and Melech Mulo Batishbachos, which normally would be the closure of Hallel, and we're going to postpone that until after Nishmas. And Rabbi Yochanan wants to maintain the same structure with regard to Leil HaSeder, because after all, Rabbi Yochanan's springboard to come up with this idea of Birchas Hashir on the night of Pesach was Psukei Zimra on Shabbos and Yom. So he wants to maintain a certain mirror image of the two. And therefore, he's going to insert Birchas Hashir of Nishmas after Hallel, but somehow it's going to be part of Hallel. How do we achieve making it part of Hallel? We delay the Melech Mulo Batishbachos until after Nishmas. Okay, here I'm going to return this to this. Tanur Rabbana, we learned in a Brisa, Revi Gomer Olav Esahalel. Okay, so far the Brisa is just reiterating what we saw in the Mishnah, right? If we look on the previous Amud, it says Revi Gomer Olav Esahalel. By the way, just on the side, what does the word Gomer mean in this context? I'm not asking for a literal translation, but what is the halachic significance of the word Gomer? Anybody? The silence here is deafening.
Maybe saying the full Hallel?
Excellent. Beautiful. Joe says it. We have two categories of Hallel. We've got what's called a half Hallel, halb Hallel, and we have a full Hallel. In fact, the Sfaradim will only recite a bracha on a full Hallel. And then Nusach is not a Sheikh Chanim Tzos Tzivana Likros Hallel like we have it, but rather Sheikh Chanim Tzos Tzivana Ligmoras Hallel. And this Gemara uses that word Gomer Olav Sahal. Now, what's the word Olav? Olav means that on the one hand, we hold on to the kos. We don't drink the kos. We're only going to drink the kos after the Hallel. But by holding on to the kos and reciting Hallel on the kos, we bind together the kos with the Hallel. The Omer Halagol, Divrei Rabbi Tarf. Now, this again is our minhag, like we saw in the Haggadah, that at the very end of Hallel, we have what's called Halagadol. Halagadol is chapter 136. So if you look in Tehillim 136, again, I'm not sure if there's any holiness to the numbers here because it's not clear that the breakdown of all the Tehillim was always done according to the Torah, but in any event, 136. Who can remember 136? Yeah, I need some sort of a memory device. Sima Ladava. Anyway, 136. And what's unique about Halagadol is that it always ends with Kili Olam Chazda, right? Let me again borrow the Haggadah from you, Joe, if you don't mind. Right. Kili Olam Chazda. It's very interesting, by the way, how David HaMelech in this 136, he groups together various praises to God. Sometimes he has groups, and sometimes it's an individual entity unto itself. For example, Hodul Hashem Ki Tov, Kili Olam Chazdo. That stands on its own. But later on, he joins together many things. For example, he'll have Vehever Yisrael B'tocho, V'nir Paro V'chelo B'yamsuf. Well, actually, I should go back one paragraph. Ligozer Yamsuf Ligzorim. So God separates or splits the water. Vehever, the Vav, Vehever Yisrael B'tocho adds another paragraph of the fact that Klal Yisrael were able to go through the dry land. And then, after Klal Yisrael go through the dry land, the waters fall and inundate the Mitzrayim. And that's Vinir Paravachelis. So you have a unit that's made up of three different parts, all of which are related to Kriyas Yamsuf. For example, the wars against Sichon and Og are considered one entity. L'Sichon Melech HaMori, Uli Og Melech HaMori. She adds the Vav to integrate them into one piece. Again, there are a lot of questions that you could ask here, in both directions. There's cases where it's not apparent that these ideas are to be united, yet David HaMelech combines them with a Vav. There are other cases where David HaMelech leaves out the Vav, and yet you would think he should have integrated them into one whole. So, that's not a simple matter here, to go through this whole, it's 136. So we're talking now about Rabbi Tarfon, and Rabbi Tarfon says that it's not enough on the fourth kos to recite Hallel. It's not enough to recite Birchas Hashir, that's 2. But number 3, we have to recite Hallel Haggadah, this paragraph, which is kapitel number 136. And then we get back to our old question. Is this part of Hallel? Is it a separate entity? And if you look at our minhag, it seems like it's a totally separate entity. Because we've already recited Yaluch Hashem Elokeinu al kol ba'asecha, u'l'shimcha noah zamer kimol vad olam ha'to'el, and then we recite Hallel Haggadah. But yet, the Baal Haggadah, the way we have it, did exactly what he did with Birchas Hashir according to Rabbi Yochanan of Nishmas Kol Chai. He waits to recite Hallel Haggadah until he finishes Hallel, but yet he hasn't yet finished Hallel because he still hasn't recited Yishtabach and Melech Mulo Batishbachos. So once again, we have this complex relationship between one piece of Shevach and the entire entity of Shevach, namely Hallel. Yesh Omrim, no. There's no such thing as Hallel Haggadah as far as Leil HaSeder is concerned. But rather, Hashem roi lo echser. Anybody have that minhag? I never saw it. It means that on the fourth kos, we should be reciting Psalm number 23. It's one of the most famous psalms, if not the most famous in the entire book of Tehillim. 23. The Lord is my shepherd. Okay, now we have a strange statement of the Rashbam. I say strange because to me it sounds very strange. Because we've been talking about Hallel, and we've been talking about Birchas Hashir Te'et Hallel, we're talking about Hallel Haggadah Te'et Hallel, and all of a sudden Rashi says, Hashem ro'i al shem hamazon sha'achlu tzarech lo. What does the Rashbam mean over here? So I looked in the footnote number Zion to see if it would shed a light on this Rashbam. He says, Af al pi, medrash shocher tov, shemafarish kol chelkei hamizmar al inyan yitzias Mitzrayim v'alicha b'midbar. So this is a whole nother shita. And that makes a lot more sense. He interprets the entire Hashem roi lo echsar as referring to Yitzias Mitzrayim and the sojourning of the Jewish people through the Midbar. And it's therefore appropriate for the Leil HaSeder. According to Rashbam, we're thanking Hashem for Mozon. I mean, we have Birkas HaMozon, and we've already recited Birkas HaMozon, and now we need to thank Hashem, our shepherd, who guarantees that we have food to eat and we sustain. I don't get it. Okay, Rabbi, we're going to stop here and we'll learn a little Sanhedrin. Be'ezer Hashem. I wish you a great day. And let's see if we can make a note of where we got up to. What's tomorrow? Tomorrow's Tuesday. You too. I don't see. Have a great Shavuos.